I'm Sam,
And this is Gabe.
and this is Coaster Wars.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Coaster Wars podcast, the only podcast that takes two coasters and compares them to each other. Today we have a great matchup for you guys. We are calling this height versus terrain.
And I feel like we've said this a lot with our top 15s, but this is another weird mashup. Me and Gabe just sat for a couple of minutes before recording, trying to decide what the hell to call this episode.
These two coasters are definitely on the opposite ends of the spectrum. They're two very interesting coasters, though. I think something different. They're not ride experiences that you can get in other places. I think that's a cool thing about both these roller coasters. They're very unique. They stand out in a crowd. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
So I definitely think it's going to be a good one. The coaster that I am bringing to the battle, you have not gotten the opportunity to ride.
no, and after doing research, I'm really mad about it. There is that, and I've said that about a lot of the ones that Gabe has ridden and are included on his list that I haven't ridden. But let's be honest, they're all really good coasters. So I just apparently need to get my butt around to some more parks next year.
You know, I've only ridden 100 coasters, and we said this earlier in the podcast, but the 100 coasters that I have had the opportunity to ride personally are some of the best in the country. I've really made it a point to try and get to, some coasters that a lot of people consider to be in their top 5 or their top 10, whatever, just so I can personally experience them. And that's how I've based off my roller coaster trips. There's only a few parks like Six Flags Fiesta Texas and, Indiana Beach Amusement Park that just happen to get thrown in there. But there's a lot of parks that we have tried to go to that have the top tier roller coasters in this country. So.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I'm sort of on the opposite side where I've just been more of like a proximity thing. Like when I went to Six Flags New England, it was just because I was spending the summer in Maine. So it was just basically the closest park to me that wasn't like a freaking 10-hour drive. So
What? You're saying you saying you wouldn't fly all the way to freaking New Jersey just to ride a roller coaster?
well, I know that's what you did. I'm just saying it was easier to do that in a weekend than what you did. Goodness gracious.
I know that was a long trip for 3 days, but it was a good one. So,
Yeah.
but without further ado, shall we introduce our two fighters here today?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In the blue corner, standing at a massive height of 325 feet and reaching a top speed of 95 miles per hour. Hailing from the farm fields of Charlotte, North Carolina, and the B&M Gym, it is Fury 325. In the right corner, standing at a height of 185 feet and reaching a top speed of 73 miles per hour. Hailing from the hills of Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and the RMC Gym, it is Lightning Rod. Let the fight begin. So obviously my number 3 here is Fury 325.
And mine is Lightning Rod, a returning fighter.
Yes, two good coasters, two very good coasters. I think we should talk about Fury just because you haven't been able to experience it.
Okay.
And I have. So this roller coaster was a really interesting trip for me. I was kind of wasting my time down in Nashville, Tennessee. Carowinds in Charlotte is a 365-day-a-year park. So right around Christmas time, I think it was before Christmas. It was right before their holiday event started. I'm like, screw it. I'm going to drive 6.5 hours just to ride this roller coaster. So I drove all the way out there, and the high temp for that day was going to be like 46 degrees. I didn't even know if the coaster was going to open. And, I got there, opened obviously, and I have probably 30 different ride experiences on this coaster, so I really understand what this ride is all about. It's not like I only got one ride on it and then had to leave. It was so slow that day that I was pretty much a walk-on all day, even only running one train. And I absolutely fell in love with this coaster. The best way to describe Fury 325 is like B&M and Intamin kind of got together and had a baby. Even though I know Intamin has they have no contributions to this coaster at all, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't feel like a B&M. Even though it is. It doesn't have that, kind of like... See, with B&M, they've always kind of played it safe in recent memory, and this is definitely not that. This is pushing the envelope a little bit for what B&M is willing to do. I think that's why I really, really enjoy this coaster, is because it's not a traditional B&M.
Yeah, when I was doing my research, that was one of the things that I read in a review, was that it was a B&M roller coaster that was absolutely nothing like any other B&M that's out there. And I watched a POV and stuff like that to really get an idea of what this coaster was all about, and I could really even just tell from watching the POV and a layout that it's not a normal B&M roller coaster.
Yeah, the biggest difference I think is that this coaster stays a lot closer to the ground and it carries its speed and intensity through the entire layout. Like a traditional B&M Hyper or Giga coaster is kind of like, up, down, but the elements are big, drawn out, massive airtime hills or curves or overbanked turns. And this still has a little bit of that, but it stays a lot closer to the ground. It carries its speed through the entire layout. It's definitely more of a speed coaster than traditional B&Ms are. And I think because of that, it feels more intense. And it has a better overall ride experience, I think. A good example is this is a roller coaster that actually had a couple of maintenance issues. This is the roller coaster that everybody had the massive social media outburst when one of the posts had a big crack in it and then they taped it up and the people thought that's how they were going to run the roller coaster. But they ended up fixing it, putting a brand new support in. But that's a good example. That doesn't happen to B&Ms. B&Ms don't break. So for the fact that this roller coaster did shows how much more forces are involved in it and a little bit more how, like I said, they tried to push the envelope with this ride.
Talking about that social media outburst, I remember, so being a roller coaster nut, inevitably I talk about them with other people that aren't exactly roller coaster nuts. And some people are like, oh my God, did you hear about that? It was a cracked support and stuff. And it was so funny to me because they were so freaked out about it. And I was like, oh, it's no big deal. They'll fix it and it'll be fine. And it just was hilarious to me, the level of like concern other people had, and then to me I was like, oh, it's no big deal, it's fine.
Well, there was two reasons it blew up on social media. Number one, the roller coaster was still running when it malfunctioned.
Okay.
And number two, where it happened to malfunction was a very visible spot for guests. And then the biggest thing people were saying was, well, how did a guest spot this before the maintenance team? Or how did a guest spot this before, someone on the staff at Carowinds noticed it? Well, there's two reasons for this. Number one, a hairline crack can turn into a massive crack over the course of an hour. It doesn't take very long. As you're constantly running trains across the track, it does not take long for these tiny little cracks to become a major problem. And then the second reason is where this roller coaster is located. It's on the very edge of the park, but in order to get inside Carowinds, you have to walk underneath Fury because Fury is right at the very front and it runs across the very front. It's kind of like their crown jewel, so they put it right on the entrance. So literally every single guest that enters the park had to walk past it. And that's how they noticed it before an actual employee noticed it because of where this roller coaster was actually located. Obviously, it was a good thing that someone noticed it and reported it and everything. But B&M came out and they said, well, there's multiple fail-safes. Like, just because one support is bad does not mean the whole roller coaster is going to fall out of the sky. So it wasn't necessarily unsafe to run it during that malfunction. But obviously, they got it fixed. This roller coaster is back up and running. And it's not a safety concern, obviously. Otherwise, the coaster would not be running right now.
Yeah, and so talking about how that malfunction could have occurred, we do have to talk about the forces on this ride. This coaster has a top speed of 95 miles per hour. That is freaking insanity to me. And it pulls a top force of 4 Gs. That is absolutely insane. This thing has some crazy forces going into the ride experience you get on it.
Yeah, and that was the point I wanted to make, was that when that malfunction occurred, like I said, it occurred in a very heavy, stressful spot on the roller coaster, and that's why I said these cracks sometimes, if they're a hairline fracture or whatever, not visible to the naked eye when you inspect the roller coaster, they can turn into an issue very, very quickly. Just because 4Gs, I mean, that's a high number for any roller coaster, I think, let alone a B&M Giga, and and that's how some of these stuff happens. Like I said, though, B&M designs their roller coasters with fail safes, so if a support does happen to fail, there are backups, or it's not, like I said, the coaster's not going to fall out of the sky. There's other supports that can bear the load when one fails.
Yes.
So and that's how all roller coasters are constructed. They're constructed with extra supports, not the bare minimum. So if one does fail, the coaster is still relatively safe.
Mm-hmm. But with that, you want to go into the layout of this ride?
Oh, absolutely. This layout is a top tier layout. And that's why it makes my top 5. And here's the other thing I want to just kind of like asterisk a little bit. I said earlier in the podcast it was like 46 degrees for the high. So I did not experience this roller coaster at its best. Like, just think about that for a moment. Like, I did not get to experience it on a hot day with a full train after it had been running for 6 or 7 hours. And I still think this is a number 3 coaster. So that should really give you a hint on how good this roller coaster really is.
Oh, yeah, that's
but with that,
crazy.
Yeah, so right that, we start with the 320-foot drop, which makes this a Giga coaster. And you pop up into the largest element on the roller coaster, and that is the massive 200-foot tall overbanked curve. But you still carry quite a bit of speed, even though it is 200 feet tall. You still carry quite a bit of speed, and you get some really awesome positive G-forces. After that, you drop down and you curve to the left before popping up into what I call a switchback airtime hill, which is what really makes this roller coaster what it is. There's shallow airtime hills where you pop up, and as you're getting negative G-forces, you also get laterals, and that's why I call them a switchback. So after the first switchback, you kind of curve back to the right before popping up into a left-hand switchback airtime hill that pops right up over the walkway and gives everybody walking into the park a really good view of your scared face. Before popping up into one of the most visually stunning elements in roller coaster history, and that is the treble clef element. So basically what this is it pops up, and at the very top it kind of turns into a wave turn, and it is one of the best sustained floater airtime moments on the entire ride. And like I said, visually it is a very appealing element to look at, and that's when you drop down into the Fury Tunnel underneath the other walkway into the park, before popping up into the third and final switchback airtime hill. And then after that, you pop up into another just straight traditional airtime hill, which is another good sustained moment, before diving down and banking to the right and into a 360-degree helix with a awesome near-miss moment. One of the supports for the massive overbank turn that earlier in the ride, you get right up next to, and it feels like it's going to take your head off. It's an awesome moment. Before diving down into a bunny airtime hill, into a banked left-hand turn, into another bunny airtime hill, into the final turn, into the pop-up, into the final brakes. So it's a simple layout. It's nothing that sounds super crazy on paper, but the way the train carries its speed through the entire roller coaster is really what makes this ride. And then those switchback airtime hills are something else. It's my favorite part of the roller coaster are those switchback airtime hills, because, like I said, as you're popping up, you're also turning to the left or turning to the right, and it's kind of a quick kind of whippy moment that you don't normally would get on a B&M, and I just absolutely love those 3 switchback airtime hills.
Yeah, when we talk about with other B&Ms, as Gabe was kind of describing before, we talk about how the company sort of became a play it safe kind of cookie cutter roller coaster company, and we always say this. We're like, there's no such thing as a bad B&M, maybe. Most of the time, if you get a B&M Hyper or I mean any of their other roller coasters, they're usually good coasters, but they're not great or top tier or these epic machines. So and a lot of that comes from, especially with their B&M Hypers, is it's just really nice straight floater airtime. And that's really kind of all you get on the roller coaster. So the fact that they've incorporated other forces into this ride already puts it above other B&M roller coasters. And then on top of that, I mean, you've got to put in the asterisk. This has a top speed of 95 miles per hour. It's a height of 320 feet, which just means that it's bigger and badder than other ones out there too.
Yeah, it's just a very thrilling ride experience that you don't normally expect from a B&M. And there's a reason. The other thing I talk about with this roller coaster is it's won the best steel coaster for like the last 7 years, basically since it opened. So in 2015, it has won the best steel coaster in the world, and there's a reason for that. This is a awesome coaster, not just for the general public, but also for coaster enthusiasts. And the first drop, the switchback airtime hills, the treble clef element, which and they wanted to make. Here's the thing about the treble clef element that I personally love is they wanted an element visually stunning that also delivers good forces because it's hard to do both. If it looks good, it might not necessarily be a good ride experience, and that is not true at all for that element. And I love this coaster from start to finish. Obviously, I've always been more of an airtime guy, but I just love the combination of multiple forces at once. Because, and I've said this before in previous podcasts, certain coasters sometimes only give you one element at a time, whether it's airtime, G-forces, or laterals, where this coaster combines all three of those forces into the same elements. You pop up, you get some airtime, then you twist, you get laterals, and then as you dive down, you get some positive G's, all kind of in the same moment. And that's really what puts this coaster in the upper echelon of roller coasters, in my opinion. And that's why it is number 3 on my top 15.
As much as we both love airtime, when a coaster, so I'm going to bring it up again because I got to, is like something like Steel Vengeance, and which obviously has a ton of freaking ejector airtime. But when it does the same exact thing to you just over and over and over again, you honestly get bored. You're not entertained anymore. You're like, we're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it literally gets boring. So as much as we love the airtime and we do want a ton of it, we still want to be entertained. And to do that, you have to break up that airtime with other elements, other forces, combine them to make them more interesting. And I think that's what Fury 325 does so well, is it manages to break up that airtime and incorporate other forces or use that airtime in interesting ways and beautiful amalgamation to make it an amazing ride experience. And
it's just more creative is what it comes down to. It's more creative and it's more interesting. It makes you, when you see a roller coaster like this on paper and you watch a POV of it, it makes you really want to ride it. And that's why I drove 6.5 hours to ride the dang thing, because this is a bucket list coaster for people. And it was a bucket list coaster for me. And I said, well, I'm within 6 hour drive of this thing. I'm going to go drive out there and ride the damn thing.
This is another thing, just real quick. You got to understand about being Gabe is we're Midwest people. And it's a caveat of Midwest people is that we don't care how far the drive is. We see some, like he said, 6 hours and we're like, oh, that's not that far. We can do that. That's fine. We took a trip to
Yeah.
Ohio and it was like, what is it, like 18 hours to get all the way out there or something?
I think to get to Kings Island, that was 17 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
And then to top it off, we also included a stop at Indiana Beach on our way out. So it's one of those coasters that allures you in because it is creative and it is unique and it is thrilling. Which, when you combine all those three together, you get a ultra elite roller coaster. But we're gonna run out of time if we forget about Lightning Rod here. So
Let's switch gears.
why don't you? Yeah, why don't you dive right into the layout? Just kind of do a general overview since we've already talked about it.
Okay, so Lightning Rod is a roller coaster that's at Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It is an RMC, and this thing kind of has its own history. It was originally a wooden launch roller coaster, which then they had to go through the 2020 to 2021 season. They had to replace several thousand feet of the track with the RMC's iBox track, which then made this a launch hybrid coaster. And unfortunately, in the coming season, they're going to be getting rid of the launch and making it an accelerated lift hill. And the biggest caveat with that was just reliability issues. Some people would go to this park and try to get a ride, and the coaster wouldn't even be open all day. So me and Gabe are in the very lucky group of people who've gone to this park and been able to get multiple rides. But to go into this layout real quick, you are launched up that lift hill. It's a 0 to 45 mile per hour launch. The G's are a little bit more intense because you are being launched uphill, but it's really sort of a heavy launch at the beginning, and then you do slow down towards the top, so you're not being like shot over this lift hill at 45 miles per hour. It does slow down towards the top. But there is a small little pre-drop that then leads you into what is the actual 165-foot, 73-degree drop. And that brings you to the top speed of 73 miles per hour on this ride. And that leads into the 90-degree banked wave turn on this ride, which leads into some airtime hills. That's, goodness gracious, I cannot read my own notes. I didn't go into it as in depth, but it leads into some airtime hills that eventually bring you up into what we call the quad down. And it's a series of 4 hills that bring you down into a sharp right turn, into a banked U-turn that leads into the final brakes. And that is a really simplified version of this layout.
I think the word you were looking for is the twist and shout element.
Thank you.
After the wave turn, which is one of my favorite RMC elements. Basically what it is you are banking to the right, turning to the right, pulling up into the air, and then it flips you to the left, and the track banks back to the left as you're getting airtime, and then it flips back to the right into another turn. They call it the twist and shout element because that's basically what it does. It twists, and then you shout. Duh. Us roller coaster enthusiasts and roller coaster engineers are not very creative in naming things. Let's be honest here. That's why there's like 7 different Goliaths from Six Flags, chains, because we can't name anything. But yeah, this roller coaster, as we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, is another very unique roller coaster, a very creative roller coaster that stands out. And another bucket list coaster that really makes you want to come and experience it. I had the fortunate opportunity to be actually in the state of Tennessee, but the first time I rode it, I drove, I think, 4.5 hours from Nashville, which was during my massive trip from the state of Wisconsin on my motorcycle. And I just decided to take a day, drive out there, and then I camped out in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee there. I spent the night, and then I jumped in my motorcycle and left. And this roller coaster is another one that you would be willing to drive to experience because it is so unique and so captivating.
Yes. With my experience with this, me and Gabe have taken a previous trip to Kings Island, and I rode the Beast, and the Beast really ignited in me a love for terrain coasters, and that's what this thing does, or is. What it does is it utilizes the natural hills of Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, to really just make an amazing riding experience. And so when you look at this ride, it doesn't look that big because the track itself doesn't come that far off the ground. But it, like I said, it utilizes those hills and it manages to give you an amazing layout. And one of the things I like to talk about with that quad down, because it's another amazing moment and one of my favorites on this ride, is what the ride does is it takes you up and over this large hill. And so when you turn around for that quad down, you're on top of the hill and you're coming down back towards the park. So you have this really great view of the whole park as then you're then shoved through this element. And also to talk about that quad down, it's not just for airtime hills back to back straight down, but in between some of those airtime hills, it also has banking turns. So you get a little bit of laterals in there, which really makes this an unique element to this ride. And I really personally love it a lot.
Yeah, it once again, like I said, it's creative, it's unique. What it does is it takes the positives that Pigeon Forge Tennessee offers with the terrain and the different ways you construct a roller coaster. It takes advantage of that and really creates a awesome layout. And that quad down is just it is one of those moments that it really builds. That's what I'm looking for. It really builds. So the first one, it hits, but it's like, oh, cool, and then you hit the second one, you're like, wait a minute, that was good. And then you hit the third one, and you're like, and then you hit the fourth one, and you're like, oh my god, that is just absolutely insane. Because as you're going down the side of the hill, you're hitting airtime moments, so you're gaining speed. And it's just one of those moments where it's like, whoa, 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 yeah, and it's a very exciting moment. It's another one of those crowd things on a roller coaster where everybody kind of like reacts to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, this roller coaster is so much fun. It's a ride that, and this is what I like about roller coasters, that you get off and you just can't help but have a smile on your face. And that's how you really had a good experience. Fury 325 does the same thing. Every time you get off of it, you're just grinning from ear to ear, and it just makes you so happy. And that's what these two roller coasters really do, and that's what I love about them.
Oh, yeah. When we talk about this ride, I do feel like we have to mention the park that it's in, for me personally, at least. So this roller coaster is at Dollywood, and Dollywood is one of the prettiest parks I have ever been in. And to talk about it,
It's such an underrated amusement park, even though it only has like 8 coasters.
oh yeah, that's the biggest thing is it doesn't have a lot of roller coasters. So, but it has so many great like shops and facades, and they have shows and stuff that go on that we didn't even see there. And then me and Gabe, we had the opportunity to go at like the opening weekend of their holiday event. So the entire park was decorated and all Christmas lights and stuff. And I said in the last episode when we talked about this ride, I had never enjoyed walking in between coasters so much in my entire life. It actually made walking in between them fun. So
This is a park where I could probably say we spent more time off roller coasters than on them. And for a roller coaster enthusiast, that doesn't happen.
no, no,
At all.
no, never.
So that should really tell you something.
Oh yeah. So, and then another thing that we have to go in with this ride, because last time we didn't talk about it because it was Gabe's episode, is I do want to talk about the theming with this ride because it does have a very fun theme. This roller coaster is located in Jukebox Junction of the park, which is kind of like a 1950s designed section of the park. They have like an old 50s diner there and stuff. And when it comes to Lightning Rod specifically, it is designed after like a 1950s era hot rod, and the entire station and the queue line is designed after like a mechanic shop where these people are building this hot rod, and there's all kinds of memorabilia and charts and like parts laying all over the place, and it does have a really cool theme.
It gives off Grease Lightning vibes a little bit, if I'm being honest. Da 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 Grease Lightning. That's kind of the vibes you get a little bit, I can't believe I just did that, but
That's staying in. I hope you know that.
Yeah, but one of the part of the theming that I really love is the little engine revs it gives right before it launches you up the side of the up the side of the hill. Like it goes vroom, vroom, and then it launches you up the side of the hill, which is just a nice little touch.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's a very well themed ride. But Dollywood does theming very well, and Dollywood prides themselves in decorations and appearance and food and more than just roller coasters. And that's why I say it's an underrated park, because they want to give you an overall great experience, not just a bunch of really fun roller coasters, which is what Six Flags does. And I loved both of my times here at this amusement park, and I definitely will be going back at some point in the future for sure.
Oh yeah. And I know we're running low on time, but I do have to go into this for just a minute. We have to talk about the last ride that me and Gabe got on there because I don't think we talked about it quite as much in our last episode. So when me and Gabe we went as a family, it was actually our parents joined us as well, and the park ended up staying open for an extra hour that night because it was so busy. And so we're like, we're just gonna go ride Lightning Rod like a bunch of times in a row. And so we got over there, and the last ride we got on this coaster, we swear to goodness that they turned the launch up to like 100 or something. We have no idea why, but the launch on our very last ride, it was we were like the last train, felt so much faster, and it just like it bumped up this ride for both of us. It was such a good last ride.
Yeah, it was just one of those moments where you're like, "What just happened?" Like, oh my god, I gotta like catch my breath here. Holy crap! But yeah, it's just it's one of those moments where you can look back at it and go, wow, that roller coaster was awesome, and it sticks in your brain. And that's how these coasters make it into our top 15, is it sticks in your brain, you know?
Yes.
So, with that though, I'll just go right ahead and say it. Fury 325, I'm sorry, is just it's on a slightly different level than Lightning Rod. Lightning Rod is lower on my top 15. Fury 325, I gotta take on this one just because I think this is one of those situations where size really does matter. And, and that's what it comes down to with Fury. Is it's just bigger and badder than a lot of other roller coasters.
Yeah, and see, for me, I think Lightning Rod is going to take it, but the only thing setting Fury 325 back for me is the fact that I haven't ridden it. And it's a bucket list ride for me. It is something I do really want to ride, and I'm sure when I do ride it, it is probably going to beat out Lightning Rod, but it's just a simple fact that I haven't ridden it, so Lightning Rod is going to take it for me. And I hope to very soon get a ride on Fury 325.
Absolutely. With that, though, we'll be heading into our next week episode. We have Ejector versus Floater, part 2 or part 3, whatever part we're on for
I
that
know.
name. But that's really what it comes down to: is it is Ejector airtime versus Floater
This
airtime.
is
Um,
quintessential ejector versus
two
floater. Like,
two roller coasters that are in the upper echelon of their respective, genres or whatever you want to call them, and they're two really good roller coasters. Let's just leave it at that. One is a personal favorite, I think, of yours, and then the other is definitely a personal favorite of mine. So
it's a personal favorite of
it'll
us
be a good
both.
battle.
Okay. Join us everywhere next week for whatever part we're on of ejector versus floater.